Let's do.
Hey guys, it's the old man here. Been a while since we've done a little video. It's been a really hectic last couple of weeks, but last week we did manage to get out here and spent about 10 or 11 hours trying to get the electrical system on the beast here going. And I gotta tell you, we ran into some really crazy stuff with this thing. And you know, I'll start with the fuse box. This is a fuse box out of one of the parts cars. And when you actually pull the fuse box down, this is actually bolted into a little cover. And so I wanted to kind of figure out where we were at with everything, and so I went and got online and got onto a manual, shop manual, and I determined where everything was at, what everything does. These are all spots for relays here. There are 2 relays in here. And the first thing I found out about the Black Beast is somebody had a bunch of problems with the damn thing, and they started swapping things around. And one of the things that's a problem is that all of these relays, like these, all have the same number on them. But if you've ever popped out your dash and may have wondered, one of the things that happens with these cars is that they put a red diagonal line across some of these, and the reason for that is if you take these relays out and you look at them, what you got here is you've got 2 relays that are essentially identical. However, if you look at this very center pin here, one of them says 87 and one of them says 87A. And these relays both function very differently from each other. And I wanted to make sure, and my suspicions were correct, that somebody hadn't got in there and started messing with things and screwing stuff up. So I drew this little diagram, and if you'll notice on this diagram that what we got is we got all of our relays arranged this way, and we've got these 7 relays over here. And 2, 3, 5, and 6, these 4 relays, those are for air conditioning. This car didn't have air conditioning, so therefore we didn't put those 4 in. But if you'll notice, these 5 relays have the little diagonal line in them. I'll try to show you on this one. I can get the right angle. There is a line across this. I'm gonna get under there with a Sharpie, and I'm gonna remark the ones in this particular car so that there's no question about it. So anyway, so that was the first problem we ran into. When you start troubleshooting problems, I've also made a pretty good list here of what these are all relays, E1 through E8 down here. And in my case, tell you, after I got them all straightened out, we started running into a problem with this car overheating a little bit when we got it running and start test driving it and that kind of thing. And it turns out, after a lot of screwing around, that the relay that I moved back over for the radiator fan happened to be bad. As soon as I popped it out and stuck another one of these little babies in, voila, radiator fan started kicking on and working like it was supposed to. And that one took me a little bit to find, because I went through a bunch of other troubleshooting procedures to figure out what was causing the problem. I can tell you where I started was there's a switch with 2 wires on the radiator itself. So I jacked the car up, crawled under there and unplugged it, and I put my ohm meter on the wires coming out of that thermostatic switch that screws in the radiator, and put my ohm meter on it. I knew the car was well over temperature that it needed to be for that to kick in, and I was absolutely correct. As soon as it warmed up enough, that it went to 0. So I knew that was working. I unplugged the fan motor, and I put 12 volts directly to it with the ground on the other side, and the fan didn't run. So I think I had a bad ground or something, because it should have just ran. So I didn't have a good ground on that thing, and that kind of tripped me up a little bit. So I was trying to be in a hurry. If I'd have ran a ground wire directly to the battery and had a good connection, it probably would have fired up and ran just fine. But anyway, nevertheless, turned out to be the relay. Got that taken care of. On the back side of the fuse box, if you take the screws out and you pull this thing down, you end up with enough wires to fill all of those little pins up. And this is your main battery wire, and they call it the brown wire on these Fiats. And if you've ever had any experience with low voltage problems, you know about the brown wire. And there is, it's too small. It really is. And there is a conversion for that. It's very simple, and I recommend doing it if you're having any kind of voltage problems, where things running slow, or things dimming when you're trying to turn stuff on. And that is to simply get yourself a decent size wire, 10 gauge or better, and go directly to the battery and come down here and tie into that brown wire, and make sure you've got good soldered connections and a damn good connector on that thing right there. And if you do that, about 50% of your electrical problems will go away. The other thing that we did, Matt did this, is that there's several little discs that you'll notice around the car. There's one under the dash on the driver's side. There's some down in the headlight wells. There's one in the engine compartment. I think there's 6 or 8 of them. I don't remember exactly, but you need to make sure that those discs are taken off, and you clean them up really good. You use sandpaper, put them on a wire wheel, wire brush, do something, and clean all of those connections up. And that's exactly what we did to this thing. And we're having basically no electrical problems, with short of a couple things that we ran into that I'm going to talk about here in a minute. But you start pulling these plugs out one at a time, and start checking all these connectors, and make sure you don't have any corrosion in there or in the plugs. Now, ideally, the car's not been wet inside, so you shouldn't have too much problem. I would even recommend maybe putting a little dielectric gel on your connectors before you put them back in there, just to make sure everything just keeps from corroding up and stuff. Very important. If you don't want to take shortcuts on this electrical stuff, just don't do it. I mean, that's just one of the biggest problems these cars have, and they're frustrating, and I hate when things don't work. It drives me crazy. So anyway, so that's enough about the fuse box. All right, so the next thing we did is, after we got the fuse box and all the relays straightened out and everything working like it was supposed to be, got all our connections cleaned up, and we had a headlight, the driver's side headlight. You turn the headlights on, and the passenger side door would come up, and the driver's side wouldn't. But if you reached in there and manually cranked the door up with this little knob, you turn the headlights on, they'd work. I could have just unplugged it so that one wouldn't try to go up and down. But when you turn the headlights off, it'd go down, it just wouldn't go up. And if you ever run into a problem with that, first thing you want to do, make sure your ground is good. Make sure it's plugged into a nice clean connector. But what you're probably looking at, if you look down here at this headlight door motor, you'll see there's a diode here, and there's a little diode right there. And if either one of those diodes goes out, the motor will either fail to go up, or it will fail to go down, or if both diodes are bad, it won't go up or down. These diodes are literally pennies. They're cheap, probably 4 to 6 cents a piece. It's a 1N4007 if anybody needs to order them. You can find them anywhere. I don't know if Radio Shack's still around or whatever. Order them online, whatever. And use your soldering skills. If you don't know how to solder, then you might not want to be doing a whole bunch of electrical work. You might want to find somebody that can do it for you. But solder a couple of new diodes in there, chances are it'll work. And what those diodes basically do is this thing cycles. It's got a switch in here, and it cycles one time to go up. Then when you flip the switch, it cycles again to go down. And usually it's these diodes. That's usually all it's wrong. Make sure your connections are good. You got to have good connections. That's the main thing. The other thing I found out, because we did have one with bad diodes, and I didn't have any diodes at the time, and they're an hour and a half away from me, is we went out to one of the parts cars and I grabbed another headlight motor. I checked the connections and the diodes to make sure that they couldn't physically see any damage to it. You could also put an ohm meter on there. Should be able to find out whether it's got continuity or not. But I found out when I got back that somewhere in the early 80s, this shaft size changed. This is the shaft where a linkage fits on that works as a lever to actually move the door up and down. And so this car came with the larger shaft size, and the one that I put on it was the smaller shaft size, so the linkage wouldn't tighten up on here, and so this would just spin. Unfortunately, I didn't bring the linkage off the other parts car with me, so I had to drive 10 miles to go get the linkage, which has a little pin with a wrench head on it that screws into the actual headlight door. And fortunately, that part is the same on all models. So I was able to just take a 13 millimeter wrench, unthread it, bring it back, and attach it to the original motor that it came off of. And if you ever do that, one thing I will tell you is make sure that wherever position that your headlight door is supposed to be in. In my case, what I did is I turned the headlights on and brought the passenger side up, so I knew it should be in the up position. And that way, when I reached in with the headlight out so I could put that linkage on and get everything adjusted the way it should be, the door was up where it was supposed to be. So, got that done. And fortunately, I ended up with a good motor. They had good diodes in it and it worked. We got a handful of these things that I know 3 of which are bad. I've got a friend down in Wenatchee that's got some diodes, a whole drawer full of them that he's going to bring to me here. I'm going to go pick up here one of these days and we'll start repairing some of these darn things. So we got the headlights working. Went around the car, cleaned up all the connections for all the lights. We got everything working. We've got hazard lights, we've got turn signals, we've got backup lights, we've got license plate lights. I did put a lot of LEDs in the car because they're a little brighter, a little nicer. But what I can tell you is that if you're going to put LEDs in your car, you might want to avoid putting them in for your turn signals, because the way that the flasher works is it requires a load for the contacts to heat up every time that it powers the light to kick it back off again. And LEDs unfortunately don't draw enough amperage that you may have a problem with getting them to flash. So we left those just the standard incandescent bulbs. But pretty much everything was LED. So we got all the lights on the outside of the car working, and we decided to move on to the dash. This is a dash pulled out of one of the parts cars. So this one's really dirty and stuff. I probably should have cleaned it up a little bit for the purposes of this video, but if you look at the back of this gauge panel, what you'll see is there's this, basically it's a printed circuit board. There's all of these little copper tracers running around all over this place. And each side of these things has a positive and it has a ground side to it. And what happens is these bulbs have these little contacts on each side. And you see how dirty this is. There's no way this thing could ever light up. And if you look really carefully, you'll also see that this metal is exposed right here, this copper, but there's a plastic film around it to where nothing can make contact with it. And if you're ever trying to figure out how to place your bulbs or get stuff working, first thing you want to do is you want to make sure that these contacts are good and clean, and possibly bend them out just a little bit so that they make better contact with this. But you also want to take and maybe scrape this with a little, I don't know, some steel wool or a green scuff pad or something like that, because you really got to make sure that this is exposed good in order for these contacts right here to make good contact when you put them in. So like I said, you can kind of bend these little contacts and just pull them upwards a little bit. can see right here what I'm talking about. Just kind of bend that up a little bit so that they have a little bit more spring action, so they really make a good contact with these things. We did replace all of these bulbs with LEDs, and they look really fantastic at night. They just look beautiful. So we got all the bulbs working, all the lights working, and on the Black Beast, unfortunately, we got something going on with the oil pressure gauge.
That one's actually a battery voltage.
Yeah, this one's actually, this particular panel actually has just an oil light, but the Black Beast actually has right here just a battery light, and this would be the oil pressure gauge. But it also has an oil light, and the oil light's going off when you start the car, so it's got good oil pressure, but the actual gauge itself isn't working. And I actually changed the gauge out with another one out of another dash panel, and made sure that these contacts where the gauge screws in with these two little teeny tiny nuts here, I took those off, pulled the gauge out, put another one, but it cleaned all these contacts up real good so that they made good contact. And when I did, I also took a nut driver with a little socket, and I went around and I cleaned all of these other, everywhere where there's a gauge that has these little studs sticking through and these little teeny tiny nuts, and cleaned everything up to where I knew they were all making good contact. And a little farting around with the volt ohm meter pretty much determined that the problem is that there's a sending unit on the engine for the oil pressure gauge that's apparently not working. I haven't actually pulled it out to check it and see what's going on with it yet, but pretty sure that's the problem. So we got that pretty well all taken care of. Might end up with a gauge, one of these needles on either your tachometer or your speedometer that's bent. And in the case of the Black Beast, the tachometer cable was bent, probably about 500 RPMs on the tip of it. So I dug around and I found one of these that was straight, not warped. If you ever want to change one of these things, just grab a hold of it very carefully and lift it straight off. Just pull it straight off. They just push onto the shaft, and you can get that taken care of too. So we got that cleaned up, working. Had a bad brake light switch under in the pedal box where the brake pedal comes back and hits it. I have the old one laying here somewhere, but basically all it is just two wires that go onto it and a little button that just makes contact between the two wires, and it was bad, and so we popped another one in out of the parts car and got brake lights. So essentially, electrical system's done. I can tell you that it took a lot of patience and it took a lot of hours. It just does. It's very tedious work. You got to be meticulous about it. You know, one bad ground, one bad connection somewhere can really make your life miserable. So if you're going to take the time to clean all of this stuff up, or clean your dash panel up, or whatever you're doing, for God's sakes, do it right. Crimp on connectors and crap like that is just garbage. It's just going to set you up for problems down the road. Get yourself a decent soldering iron, some solder, and some heat shrink, and just do it right. If you got a crappy wire that's all chewed up or something, get rid of it. Put a new wire in. Do whatever you got to do. It's just not worth messing around with, I can tell you. So, anyway, that pretty much covers the electrical system, and right now, we're sitting pretty on getting this car actually licensed and driving. We've got just a couple little minor issues left. Some little detail stuff that's, really minor. The only two major things that I really want to get done is we need to re-bleed the brakes because we still got a little bit of a spongy pedal. And the clutch, when it sits for 2 or 3 days, the clutch master cylinder seems to be bleeding just a little bit down, and so we're going to go ahead and order a rebuild kit, or just order a new master cylinder and pop that in and re-bleed the clutch. Aside from that, mechanically, this car is sound. It is running beautiful. We haven't even done anything to it. We actually drove it up to the gas station today and put about a half a tank of really good fuel in it, and a bottle of fuel injection cleaner, and took the car out and drove the piss out of it for about 10 miles. And by the time we got back, this car literally is sitting here and it is just idling beautiful. It fires right up and it just idles perfect. The thing has an incredible amount of power for what it is. I mean, it's just great. And we're this close, guys. We're this close to this car being down to nothing but cosmetics, paint, and some just minor little stuff. And we're going to be moving on to the next project, which is going to be stripping a wrecked car and pulling the drivetrain out of it to stick it in a late model that's basically complete, and getting it going for our buddy Brandon, who you met on the last video. And all goes well, within the next couple of weeks we should have 3 roadworthy, licensed, insured, and ready to drive Fiat X19s, and so we're pretty stoked about it. And hell, we'll keep you updated, and hopefully a little more frequently. Appreciate it, guys, and make sure you hit the like and subscribe button. We'll keep this stuff coming. Please, let us know what you're thinking in the comments. And if anybody's got any questions about any of this electrical stuff, I pretty well know this thing from the front to the back and where everything's at now. So, feel free to shoot me a message and try to help you out where we can. Appreciate it again, guys. See you next time.